body is regarded as extremely prized. It is something that one should aspire towards. It is actually something that one should strive towards, because of course the body is not valuable as a body in itself. The body is actually valuable as a reflection of the mind. So therefore it is basically what later on in Latin becomes mens sana in corpore sano, which is that healthy mind in a healthy body. So even when the male body exists in Greek society, it exists not as a body, it actually exists as an embodiment of the mind. It is actually the mind that is represented in the body. Now, this kind of representation is something which is only revived. It goes into hiding for several centuries, and of course, with the incoming of Christianity, what certainly begins to happen is that there is a certain kind of fear and shame and disgust and horror of the body that is therefore inculcated. And as a result of that kind of, for the want of a better word, corpophobia, a fear of the body. As a result of the corpophobia that therefore begins to happen, what we really have is that the body is put in hiding. So if it is put in hiding, we are going to, many of you, because you're students of literature, you are going to be familiar with the poem by Robert Browning, Fra Lippo Lippi. You will be aware of how Fra Lippo Lippi was actually criticized for painting nude bodies on the walls of the monastery. And he said, okay, I don't understand why you have a problem with nude bodies, because of course nude bodies are the best example that we have of the work of God. But Fra Lippo Lippi, of course, ran into some trouble because of his representation of nudity. And many of you will know that by the time we come to the Renaissance, when Michelangelo actually paints nudity on the Sistine Chapel, the Pope, of course, comes in and orders that the genitalia be actually hidden. So therefore, there is a way in which patriarchy is constantly trying to sort of regulate even the male body, not just the female body, but even the male body. So even the male body sort of, excites a kind of anxiety that the male body also should be a proper male body. And the genitalia, of course, should not be showing. Now, if I move back to the way in which the genitalia was represented in Greek statuary, we will find that the genitalia was small. Now, many of my very naughty students, who every time I show them a picture of David, they all start to giggle. And when I ask them exactly what are you giggling about, they say, oh, sir, but it is such a small one. By it, of course, they are not referring to David's fingers. So what is really happening over here is that they all notice that David has a remarkably small penis. Now, the thing is, why did Michelangelo represent David with the small penis? And also, when Michelangelo subsequently sculpts the risen Christ, again, it is something that you can Google and find out. Even the risen Christ has got a very small penis. So what is the politics of the small penis? Well, the small penis, of course, represented controlled sex drive. Yeah. So therefore, the Greeks believed that if you were too libidinous, if you were too desirous, if you were too given to sexual activity, then what you're basically doing is you're paying more attention to the body than you should be paying. And therefore, because you're paying more attention to the body, this is where it becomes important. You are therefore losing your masculinity. Because if you are truly male, you must remember to harness the body for intellectual work. You should not prioritize the body. The body should not be an end in itself. The body should be there to accomplish its task as a means to an end. So therefore, excessive sexual desire was regarded as something that feminized men. So therefore, having an enormous penis, therefore, was the subject of ridicule. Many of you may actually look at statues of the Greek god Priapus to understand exactly why this is working. So when Michelangelo was reviving Greek aesthetics during the Renaissance in the sort of 1500s, 1520, 30, 40, what he's doing is he's reviving a kind of representation of masculinity that is about 1,000 years old. So what we really have, therefore, is this, that the male body, which functions by not being a body, for the want of a better word. So it is a body that is there but is not there. It is a kind of absent presence. So the male body is an absent presence. However, there are times when male bodies are actually used as specifically male bodies, and this is where the male body becomes ostensibly gendered in the case of warfare. It becomes ostensibly gendered in sports. It becomes ostensibly gendered, for example, when we are talking about engineering, science, technology, because it is believed, and I'm sure this is something that we are all very familiar with, is that science somehow requires male bodies. Many years ago, I had actually been talking to a science student who believed that women should not be studying science. And I said, why should women not be studying science? And to which he said, well, sir, you see, women should not study science because they have delicate fingers and they can't quite handle those dangerous chemicals. If women are put in labs, they'll burn themselves. So this is the kind of preposterous nonsense that I'm sure there are people in the sciences who still sort of hold on to. But be that as it may, it is believed that men's bodies are somehow more prepared to study science, and women's bodies are somehow more prepared to study the arts. So what is really happening then is that the male body, therefore, begins to function as male bodies when it is being deployed to, for example, defend the nation or defend the country or defend the state. So that is when the male body becomes male. However, what does not happen is that the male body is never objectified. So therefore, even when the male body is brought into existence, when the male body becomes a body, it still remains kind of disembodied because other abstract virtues are used to layer the body. So therefore, nationalism, patriotism, so those are the terms that are used to sort of cover up the gendered nature of the male body. So then the male body becomes the patriotic body. The male body becomes the brave body, the valiant body, the courageous body. So therefore, all this kind of supposedly gender neutral sort of adjectivization, yes, when you're actually applying these gender neutral adjectives, what it is basically doing is, and it is that it is constantly, again, not allowing the male body to emerge as a gendered body. And this kind of invisibility is something that we find is absolutely rampant. And we find it even now, because we find that till very recently, a very, very famous male body, namely the body of the President of America, Donald Trump, that male body was refusing to wear a mask. And the whole idea that Donald Trump was refusing to wear a mask was that he basically believed, I'm sure, at the back of his mind, is that wearing a mask would be, what would it be doing? It would be basically protecting the body, right? Now, when a man wishes to protect his body by taking a protective measure, he is bringing that body into existence. Right? So if you are protecting your body, you're basically saying that your body exists. But surely male bodies don't exist. Men don't have bodies. Men are just air, right? So therefore, the moment you're protecting your body, at that point, in a very strange way, you are losing your masculinity, which is why you have a lot of men who still now resist wearing helmets when they're riding a motorcycle, because wearing a helmet somehow kind of emasculates them, for the want of a better word. So what is really happening, therefore, is that we therefore have this astonishing kind of equivocation regarding the male body, where it is existing, but it is not existing. Now, I am actually going to finish my. How much time do I have, Professor Chaudhary?
Level, you can go on for some more time. No issue.
No, how much? How much more
15,
time?
20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes maybe.
Okay, well, maybe 15 minutes, and then I'll start taking questions.
Sure,
Okay, that's
sure.
very good. That's very good. So what really begins to happen is this kind of conditional visibility or invisibility of the male body, but which effectively becomes invisibility because the male body is the subject. The male body is never the object. Now, something happens in the 1950s, which is something that I think we should pay attention to. Now, what happens in the 1950s is that in America, well, 1940s or 50s, what begins to happen in America is that you have the production of what are called physique pictorials. Now, what is a physique pictorial? A physique pictorial is basically a magazine which is the size of a pocketbook. So it is sort of, it's about this size. A physique pictorial is basically a magazine which has got pictures of men, bodybuilders, in posing pouches. So therefore, you have these pictures of men who are not wearing anything apart from a G-string, as it were, and they are posing. Now, there's a very interesting ambivalence that these magazines were actually striding, pun intended, in the sense that what is actually going on there is that we have a sense of how the male body is supposedly embodying very patriarchal notions. Yeah, the bodybuilder, of course, is supposedly somebody who is entirely in alignment with patriarchy. But at the same time, male bodies are actually being served up for visual pleasure. So there is an odd thing that is happening over here. The male body seems to be moving away from a position of being a subject to this sort of much more ambivalent, ambiguous position of subject-object. So you don't quite know what is going on there. And I think it is this ambivalence of the physique pictorial which allowed them to function the way they did, because you see, they are not overtly pornographic because the penis is not showing, right? So therefore, they are not overtly pornographic. Anybody could pick up a magazine, a physique pictorial, to say, well, I'm buying this magazine because I'm interested in bodybuilding. What is wrong with that? So it is the way in which the male body begins to function from the 1950s onwards. Remember, 1950s is also a terrible decade for feminism. This is a terrible decade. It's a very good decade for patriarchy, because women are shoved back into the domestic space. Women are being told you need not you need not work in public spaces. We have invented the washing machine for you. We have invented the microwave oven for you. We've invented the refrigerator, the television. Go home, don't work. It was a very, very regressive decade. Very regressive decade. Right at the beginning of the decade in 1949, of course, Simone de Beauvoir publishes Le Deuxième Sexe, the second sex. The 1950s becomes a terrible decade. But in that terrible decade, you have the physique pictorials. 10 years later, of course, we've got the gay rights movement, you've got the Stonewall riots, and as a result of that, in 1970, you've got the first Pride March. As a result of that, what begins to happen is that gay men and sort of and also lesbians and also feminists, they all start to look at bodies in a slightly more more complex ways. And of course, the male body, thanks to the enormous power of gay men as far in the market is concerned, Therefore, the objectification of men's bodies, specifically for the gay readership, becomes a phenomenon. And it is only give it 20 years, and within 20 years, you have got enormous billboards across New York, where you got men who are standing there in their white fronts. You've got people like Marky Mark who are actually modeling for Calvin Klein underwear. So therefore, by the time we come to 1980s, there is an ostensible objectification of male bodies that happens. So what I'm looking for, therefore, is subject to subject object to object. That is the kind of chronology that I'm presenting to you in a very simplified form. Of course, it can never be that simple, but you can sort of broadly think about it as sort of working along that line. If we come to the Indian context, if we come to Indian cinema, for example, which has got tremendous visual, cultural value, and obviously political value, if you look at actors such as Dara Singh, if you look at actors such as Dharmender, who were also taking their shirt off in the 1960s and 70s, but what is really happening there is, again, the bare-chested look of Dharmender or the bare-chested look of Dara Singh is still the male body as a subject. It is still not the male body of the object. And all of that, of course, changes with the advent of John Abraham. So with John Abraham, and especially after the 2008 film, if I'm not mistaken, Dostana, what really begins to happen is that the male body absolutely presents itself as an object, which wasn't the case before. Male body as something that can be sexually enjoyed. And in that kind of enjoyment of the male body, not only were the Indian gay men participating, but a lot of Indian heterosexual women were participating in it as well. So the re-signification of the male body then actually changes, after liberalization of the Indian economy. It is almost as though the liberalization of the Indian economy coincides with the way in which the representation of masculinity begins to alter. Now and I'm actually going to finish my presentation now because there are a couple of people that I think I have not mentioned as yet. I could, of course, mention Judith Butler, but Matangi very, very beautifully has already done that. Of course, Judith Butler comes in extremely useful when we look at the way in which bodies are signified. So you can certainly apply Judith Butler to talking about men's bodies too. But I will actually refer you to a couple of persons over here. First is Véronique Moutier. And Véronique Moutier's book on sexuality, I think, is something that is fairly useful in trying to understand how the male body metamorphoses in history. And the second person that I would want to mention is Edward Lucy Smith. Now, Edward Lucy Smith is primarily known as an art historian, but Edward Lucy Smith, his work is not just art history, in the sense that he is also, his work kind of straddles art history. It intersects art history and queer studies, gender studies. So that, I think, becomes fairly important as well to understand. Finally, I would want to leave you with questions as to how do Indian male bodies circulate in culture today. Is, for example, a Hindu male body, cis male body, does it carry the same valence as a Muslim male body? Does an upper class male body carry the same valence as a Dalit male body? Do male bodies of communities that are marginalized, that are disempowered, are those bodies denied the kind of subjectivity that other kinds of male bodies seem to take for granted? So therefore, is there a kind of objectification of the minority body that happens? Is there an objectification of the bodies that are disabled happens? And my absolute final thought is going to be regarding disability and how the disabled male body functions. And again, I would want to refer to the work of Leonard J. Davis, who has done very, very important work on disability studies. And I believe that what I learned from Leonard J. Davis is that disability is somehow always gendered, in the sense that sort of women or other biologically female, they are regarded as being born disabled. We go all the way back to Freud for that. I'm not going so far, but there is an assumption that women who even can walk and talk, they are in a certain sense disabled even then. So if we think about ability and disability as being gendered, then therefore what Leonard J. Davis does is that he asks us to understand disability as a spectrum, and in that spectrum, therefore, where does the disabled male body figure? So therefore, we have a lot of discourses, we have a lot of films, for example, in which the overwhelming narrative seems to be, look how this man overcomes his disability. So this whole narrative of overcoming disability actually functions as a way of saying, if you read it in a gendered way, it is almost like overcoming femininity, because femininity equals weakness. So if the man overcomes his disability, he then becomes a complete man. He becomes a proper man. So therefore, I would end this presentation by broadly saying, how is it that we can now regard men's bodies and we can therefore think about the way in which men's bodies are always already cultured, they're always already political, and we perhaps need to look at male bodies a bit more critically than we already do. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Niladrida, for a wonderful presentation. Your talk has raised many questions,
Oh dear.
and I'm sure there are lots of questions which will be taken up a little later by the other coordinator, Dr. Lalta Kimar. So the several questions that you sought to address are questions like, does the male body circulate in patriarchy as a subject or as an object? Are all male bodies by default abled? Tomorrow we are going to have a session with Professor Banibrata Montu, who is actually going to talk about disabled bodies.
Yes.
So are there no boundaries that is forbidden to cross? Are there restrictions regulating male bodies touching each other? And so many questions that your talk has given rise to. Now, may I ask Dr. Laltaki Mar to start the question and answer session, please? I'm sure she has a lot of questions from participants. Dr. Laltaki Mar, please.
Thank you, Assi sir. Esteemed participants, I have taken up some of the major questions. So I'll be starting with the first question to Nilati sir. What is your idea about the transgender body in the context of India? For instance, in the context of two films, Samantaral and Nagar Kirtan. What is your idea about the transgender body in the context of India?
The class of the transgendered body.
Your idea about the transgender body.
The class, okay, the class transgender bodies. What is my idea? I think your question is sort of answers itself in the sense that yes, of course, Samantaral is. I have to say it's a film that I'm not a great fan of. Because Samantaral basically means parallel, and it seems to suggest that trans lives can run parallel to cis lives. I am not terribly sure I like the image of the parallel, because I think lives should not run in parallel. I think lives should intersect, because we are part of an endlessly stretching network. So I am politically opposed to the unconscious politics of Samantaral. However, I love Nagar Kirtan, and I believe that what Nagar Kirtan does very, very astutely is that I don't know how many of you have seen it, so maybe I'm not supposed to give away the ending. But it actually says, it gives you this very powerful message at the end, that, you can trance. And over here, I'm actually going to use trance as a verb. This is something that a lot of persons have done already. Jane Mannion has done it in her book Female Husbands. So anyone can trance. So trancing then becomes an act that anybody is capable of doing, and therefore anybody can be potentially trans. And I love the way in which this is working. As far as the class bit is concerned, yes, of course, in the case of Shomantoral, it is middle class. In the case of Nagar Kirtan, it is the working class. And I think is perhaps the one good thing about these films, is that both these films basically say that trans bodies are not class specific. And I think that is something which I think is rather useful. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. The next question is, does the fluctuation of the masculine body in visual narratives, for instance, comics, work to reinforce the prevalent heteronormative notions of a society?
Yes, I'm afraid, I may not be the right person to answer this question, because I haven't studied comics so much. So maybe the person who has asked the question, they can actually look into comics in greater detail. However, yes, I think so. That would be my very uninformed answer, is that comics do tend to somehow circulate and reinforce certain normative representations of gender. And even, for example, when you had a gay character in an Archie's comic, I'm forgetting the name of that character. It happened some years ago. Even then, I think this particular gay man that was presented was very much a cis man. So therefore, there is a way in which patriarchy has subsumed homosexuality into its representational politics, by saying that you can be gay, but if you are gay, at least behave like a normal man. So there is a way in which patriarchy is sort of smuggling itself into queer theory, into queer studies, and again trying to reinforce certain normativities. And maybe comics are a good site to notice it. Yeah.
Okay, sir, thank you. Next question, which I personally find very interesting, is, though male body is not objectified in heteronormative discourse, a gay man having a male body is a subject of gaze and often objectified. What is your idea on that?
Right. Well, I don't think all gay men are objectified at all. I think this is where you should probably understand that there are a lot of gay men, who actually can pass as straight men, because their gender presentation is very normative. So therefore, the way they walk, they talk, they could be abusive, they could be riding a motorcycle without a helmet. There is no way of knowing who a gay man is until they say that they are gay. I think what you're basically talking about perhaps are feminine gay men. And yes, of course, feminine gay men are objectified in the same way that women are objectified. So because, this is exactly what I said, is that masculinity somehow sort of, liberates you from being aware of your body, but femininity makes you hyper aware of your body. So therefore, there is a certain kind of objectification that is brought to bear upon the effeminate gay man or the feminine gay man has happened very recently in Kolkata, from which I think sort of, straight acting, for the want of a better word, gay men are they are not bound by that. So therefore, some gay men can pass without being objectified, other gay men can't. So it isn't the same for all gay men.
Yes, sir. Another question is, how much does consumerism or the consumer culture contribute in politicizing the body?
Oh, it is. All of consumer culture, I'm sure, Matangi can come in on this. Consumer culture, all bodies are politicized. Not only is the male body politicized or the female body is politicized, but the way in which those of us who are interested in gerontology, sort of, bodies of seniors are politicized. Children's bodies are politicized. So in advertising, in popular culture, absolutely everything is politicized. It is another thing whether we notice it or not.
Okay, thank you, sir. Another question we received from one of the participants is, how does the male fairness cream alter the predominant discourse of masculinity?
Yes, that is good, isn't it? I think what the male fairness cream does is that it gives men a body. It gives men like a physical body, because men are not supposed to have physical bodies. They're only supposed to have, the disembodied brain. So what the male fairness stream does is that it actually gives the men a body. So therefore, yeah, so absolutely. So patriarchy, I often talk about patriarchy in terms of two things. I talk about patriarchy as a constantly mutating drug-resistant virus. So patriarchy constantly mutates, pretty much like I'm sure the coronavirus is mutating as we speak. But the other thing is that patriarchy is an omnivorous power structure. Patriarchy eats everything. It eats women, it eats men, it eats trans persons, everything. So therefore, now patriarchy sees that it is convenient to objectify the male body. So which is why I tell men that, if you think feminism is not for you, please think again. Feminism is very much for you, because once you become a feminist, you will realize how being a man is not at all empowering. It is another kind of disempowerment that you're simply not noticing.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. How do you perceive the changing iconography of Indian mythological figures in recent times?
Yeah, I am very troubled by it. I'm not going to talk about how Indian mythological figures, the iconography has changed. I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way. I'm going to talk about the way in which uh, the figure of Shiva, for example, is represented in North India, and the way in which Shiva has been represented traditionally in Bengal. Now, this is something that I have discussed with my friends many, many, many times. That when I was growing up, Shiva did not have six-pack abs. Shiva had a belly. Shiva was constantly drugged out. Shiva was sort of dreamy. And Shiva was lethargic, right? He was a drugged out, unemployed, good for nothing guy, who couldn't take care of. Actually, he couldn't even take care of his own clothes, because there is this rather wonderful incident when Shiva got married to Parvati. That Shiva, do you remember that Shiva, he had tied his tiger skin with a snake because Shiva, nobody had given Shiva a belt. Nobody. Can you imagine? Very rude. So because nobody had given Shiva a belt, he had tied the tiger skin with a snake. Now, at the site of the wedding, the snake decided to uncoil and run away. So Shiva was standing there at his wedding naked. So that is what a clumsy, good for nothing Shiva that was there in Bengal mythology. And we loved him. We loved him for that. But now Shiva has been sort of, now in Calcutta, I see more and more Shivas that have a six-pack abs, that are martial, that are almost ready to go into war, very sort of muscular Shiva. And that, I think, is something that is very, very troubling, because I think a softer Shiva has been replaced by a harder Shiva, which is the way in which a certain kind of North Indian Hinduism is taking over local Hinduisms that were perhaps not so martial.
Thank you, sir. It was a very, very interesting response. I think I'll come to the last question.
Sure.
Is disability only about physical, or it is also about not fitting to the normative structure?
Oh, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Absolutely. And this is exactly the point that Leonard J. Davis makes, is that disability, disability is produced. Nobody is born disabled. Disability is culturally produced. Because, over here, I constantly talk about public buildings. I constantly talk about the way in which, all public buildings assume, and again, this is a point that Matangi made in her presentation. I keep going back to her because there are so many similarities. The way in which the normative body is not only regarded as the male body, but the normative body is the male abled body. So there is a way in which even public buildings are designed for the abled male. So the disabled male has got very difficult access to that. So there is a way in which, if we made it the rule, for example, that all public buildings are going to have ramps, all public buildings are going to have lifts, all public buildings are going to have bathroom cubicles that have visibility access, larger stalls. I think that very soon all public buildings had used braille. All exhibitions had audio guides. Very soon we will understand that a lot of disabilities are actually going away. So disability is not something that one is born with. Disability is culturally, socially, politically produced. And that is something that we probably should pay a little bit more attention. We disable other people. Nobody is disabled. We, the able, disable them.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. There are so many other questions coming in from the esteemed participants.
Yes. Maybe you could club them if that's possible.
Yeah, that's what I was trying my level best, sir. I was trying to club the questions together. Now, Matangi ma'am wants to ask a question to Nagatri sir. So,
Yes.
Matangi ma'am, you will you may kindly unmute yourself and speak with the speaker.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Niladri,
I have cited you. I have cited you. God knows how many times today.
No, this is not a question as much as single most to say this is the single most stimulating hour I've spent in the last month. Thank you so much for that. My first question to you is, how do we not know each other already?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, much better. Yes.
So, my first question to you is, how do we not know each other already?
Yeah, I'm equally shocked. We are totally exchanging phone numbers. We have to. Yeah, we have to work. Yeah.
So,
I mean, thank God to technology.
Yes, it's true. And thank you to Anindya for curating us together.
I was about to say this. You should be thankful to me for
yes, Anindo, yes, we owe you a huge debt of gratitude.
Infinitely grateful to you. When we hopefully meet in person at some point, all dues will be paid.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Niladri, wanted to ask you, this I think is a great point of conversation between our talks, which is that both in masculinity studies, and I find the limits of feminist theory vis-a-vis body also arriving, which is we are never able to escape the discursive framing of the body. Like talk about the body is always talk about something else.
Yes.
And somehow the burden always seems to fall disproportionately on marginalized bodies to be.
Yeah.
Right. And yes. I always wonder, how do we, be it in masculinity studies, which is, specifically moves towards queer theory to even make the
Yes.
body visible, or you have Jordan Peterson. These are our options.
Yes.
Right? So we
Yes.
always end up going to these sorts of either or binaries. And I struggle with how to write about the inhabited body within the bounds of either masculinity studies or feminist theory.
Yeah.
So in your understanding and your many decades of work, where would you locate the most interesting developments in masculinity studies currently? Because I'm personally interested in that.
Yeah. No, I genuinely believe that, again, I'm so grateful for transgender studies, Matangi. I mean, had transgender studies have absolutely radically altered our conception of what the body is. And I can never overestimate the way in which transgender studies have helped me. And I believe that I think that is what it is. And also, I think what masculinity does is that it absolutely, to a very large extent, tries to make the het cis man aware that please get out of this sort of illusion that you are empowered. Because please understand that you are functioning within a very rigid structure. It is a certain illusion of empowerment, of freedom that you have. You don't. And I think, and that is exactly where I think masculinity studies is speaking in the same voice as feminist theory, is to please understand your body as being so whether or not your body is functioning as a marginalized body, or whether it is as a so-called centered body, nobody is free of patriarchal control. And please, can we understand that a little bit? I'm also fascinated by, I mean, there's so much that I didn't talk about. Food, which I did not go into at all. What kind of body is given what kind of food? It's a fasting, so why are some bodies automatically seen as being, more conducive to fasting and others are not? So therefore, the question of nudity came up in your talk. And the question of nudity is something that I deliberately brought into my talk because I simply can't think beyond nudity. And I can't think beyond sex. So therefore, since but we did not talk about food, we did not talk about illness, and the way in which men are taught that, in a certain kind of men are taught. I'm talking about the somatic body.
Right.
How can you be unwell? And that is, we all have dads in our families. We all have sort of elderly uncles in our families who are going to suffer in silence, but who will not go to the doctor. Because men are not supposed to be unwell until they collapse one day when it is too late. So therefore, there is this kind of astonishing way in which patriarchy oppresses the male somatic body, which is something that I didn't talk about. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I just wanted to say, just as like an endpoint to anybody interested in where these conversations meet, that we keep finding that these things come up elsewhere. So urban studies that you mentioned, which has been moving towards talking about hapticity as an organizing principle for cities rather than visual orientation. And disability studies. So thank you for all of that great material to think about.
Thank you, Matangi.
Well, before passing it to ASC, sir, there is another very interesting question that comes in from YouTube. I think I should be asking this to the speaker. What's your take on the interesting angle of same-sex attraction in our mythology? Don't you think ancient India was more liberated?
Oh, I wish I could share your enthusiasm. I'm so sorry to have to disappoint you. I think there is a certain way in which this is a very, very common kind of misconception that we seem to have about ancient India. I think ancient India was also remarkably patriarchal in many ways. But it was certainly liberated in some ways, I think, because ancient India, I think, thought about bodies in slightly different ways. But it wasn't, it was different. It wasn't necessarily better. So maybe that, I think, is something that I need to clarify. Same-sex attraction. In mythology, you see, what is interesting is that same-sex attraction, very interestingly, is actually used. It is mobilized is the verb that I was looking for. It is mobilized very often to draw two competing religious sects together. So same-sex attraction, in a very interesting way, actually cements fosters friendship and amity between two warring religious sects. And by doing that, in a very odd way, it seems to mimic the way in which certain animals also, when they express same-sex attraction, so when two male orangutans or two male chimpanzees, when they have sex or they establish sexual contact with each other, it is a way of resolving conflict. And in a very strange way, we have that, for example, in the case of the Shaivites and the Vaishnavites fighting with each other. Now, because Shaivites and Vaishnavites have been fighting with each other for many, many centuries, we have this astonishing creation of Ayappa, where Shiva and Vishnu basically have sex. As a result of the union of Shiva and Vishnu, you have the Lord Ayappa. Of course, there is the fig leaf of heterosexuality that is held over there. So, so that Shiva can have sex with Vishnu, Vishnu has to do, conditional cross-dressing. Vishnu has to become Mohini so that the sex can happen. So that is just a fig leaf of heterosexuality that is presented, but it is basically two male gods who are having sex. So I think that, and also the extraordinary sort of homoromantic friendship that is there between Krishna and Arjuna, in which Krishna basically says that I can do anything for you, and you are much more important to me than my wives even. There are ways in which mythology allows same-sex attraction to happen, but that is not to imagine that therefore makes it some kind of a utopian society, because patriarchy still finds a way to operate in it.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for taking all the questions wonderfully. Now, over to ASC, sir.
Okay, so thank you, Lalta Kimar, and thank you, Professor Niladri Chatterjee and Dr. Matangi Krishnamurthy. We had a wonderful, session with so many questions, and what better way to come to the end of the session. The two speakers were in a dialogue, and I just wish we could have continued for some more time, but we can't.
Yes.
So I've got an information from our technical experts that we have to end this in a couple of minutes, right? So before that, I would like to thank Niladri sir and Matangi for their wonderful sessions. For the participants,
Yes.
one thing I would like to say that we'll be joining in tomorrow. We'll be joining in tomorrow with the same link. But before we bring this session to a close, I would request all of the people who are on Cisco to switch on their video cameras so that we can take a group picture. So if you can switch on your
that's such a brilliant
video,
idea.
Yes, your webcams, please, so that we can take a group photo. And this is what, yeah. So yeah, so our technical experts are yes.
Is my hair all right? Is my hair all right?
All the people who are there on Cisco, can you just switch on your webcams? Yes, nice to see several familiar faces. Mizoraba, Kalyani Rajan, Gargi after a long time. Gargi Tolapattu, yes. Okay, nice. So could you keep, yeah, Namrata, Neena Sharma, my batchmate, my master's batchmate. Okay, so could you keep your webcam switch on for a while, please? Yeah, till I get this introduction.
I can't see Obronil Roy and I can't see Swarnadeep Biswas.
Yeah, Shaunadeep Biswas is the host here. You should also switch on. He is the person who is actually asking us to switch on our webcams.
Good, but he should switch on his webcam too.
That's true.
Very nice to see Shayon. Very nice to see, gosh, lots of very familiar faces.
And Niladvida, your fan, Panna Pal.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Very nice to see Panna again.
Nice to have Swati Pal. So, yeah, Opubo, is that okay? Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us. Tomorrow we'll be joining in with the same. I'll be reminding you. I'm sure many of you are getting so many mails from me, so many reminders. Apologies for that. So I think today's session, apart from that glitch during Niladvida's session, just for a while maybe, it was very smooth. So hopefully, it will be smooth tomorrow as well. So for the participants, all of you are there on YouTube. We have a feedback link which will be posting on WhatsApp. We expect you to fill the feedback form, and because that is very important for registering your presence. Thank you all. I'm ending the session.
Matangi and I should be past each other's WhatsApp numbers and email address, please.
Yes, please. I'll write to you, Niladri, for sure.
Right after. Absolutely. Yeah.
And you don't forget me, please. I was the one who actually connected here.
Much gratefulness, and thanks to everybody. Can I just say this is also a wonderful set of interlocutors. I've thoroughly enjoyed all the questions and engagement. This is truly thrilling in many ways.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Bye. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Yes.